She was screaming so loud you'd think someone had stolen her car. But all my 14-year-old son had done was change the Wi-Fi password. The thing is, she wasn't just mad because she couldn't watch her reality shows. What she didn't know was that my son's small prank had uncovered something she'd been hiding for years. And when the truth came out, it rocked the entire neighborhood. The morning started out calm, the kind of Saturday you look forward to all week. The sun was coming in through the kitchen window, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, and I was actually looking forward to a day without the usual HOA drama. My plan was simple: clean up the garage, maybe take a drive into town later, and then enjoy a quiet evening. I didn't know it yet, but my son Jake had already stumbled onto something that would flip our weekend upside down. Jake was always the curious type. At 14, he had the kind of brain that took things apart, just to see how they worked, and then most of the time put them back together again, somehow better than before. He wasn't just good with technology, he lived and breathed it. While most kids his age were glued to video games, Jake was the kind of kid who liked to tinker with our home network settings just for fun. It was that curiosity that set everything in motion. I was in the garage, knee-deep in old boxes, when I heard the back door creak open. "Dad," Jake called out, his voice carrying that mix of frustration and excitement he always got when he found something strange. I turned, wiping my hands on an old rag, and saw him holding his laptop like it was a piece of evidence in a crime. "You're not going to believe this," he said. I stepped over the clutter to meet him, and he spun the screen toward me. "Our Wi-Fi is crawling. I mean, it's been bad all week, but today it's practically frozen." He tapped a few keys and a long list of devices popped up on the screen. "These aren't ours," he said, scrolling through the list. "Look to smart TVs, 5 tablets, a bunch of laptops. We don't even own half of these brands. And this one here says HOA office printer." I frowned. "That's not possible. The network's password isn't something you just guess." Jake smirked, but it was the kind of smirk that meant trouble, unless someone told them. That was when I remembered something Karen, our HOA president, had said in passing a couple of months ago. She'd been boasting about how the whole neighborhood benefits from community sharing, and how she helps people get connected. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Karen was always saying things that sounded off, but I'd learned to ignore her now, though the pieces were starting to click together. "Wait a second," I said slowly. "Are you saying she's been giving out our Wi-Fi password?" Jake leaned against the workbench. "Not just giving it out, she's been handing it to half the neighborhood. And get this, there's been activity at 2 in the morning. Big downloads, like really big. Movies maybe, but the IP addresses are weird. I ran a quick check. Some of these aren't even from around here." My stomach tightened. "That's not good." "I know Jake said so. I fixed it." That's when he explained what he'd done. He'd logged into the router, changed the password completely, enabled WPA3 encryption, and even set up a MAC address filter so only devices we approved could connect. "It's bulletproof now," he said proudly. "Nobody's getting in unless we let them." I raised an eyebrow. "And you did this without telling me because—" Jake shrugged. "Because I thought you'd say no." "But Dad, come on. Internet, our bill, our rules. Why should we pay for the whole street to stream Netflix?" I couldn't argue with that. And honestly, I was a little impressed. The kid knew what he was doing. "All right," I said finally. "Just be ready for someone to complain." I didn't realize just how soon that complaint would come. It was less than an hour later when I heard a sharp, rapid pounding on the front door. It wasn't the kind of polite knock you get from a neighbor borrowing sugar. This was aggressive, like the person on the other side thought they had every right to demand entry. I opened the door, and there she was, Karen herself, dressed in her usual pastel sweater and pearls, but with a face as red as a stop sign. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped before I could even say hello. I blinked. "Good morning to you too, Karen. What's the problem?" "The problem," she said, jabbing a manicured finger toward me, "is that the entire neighborhood is without internet. People have work to do. Children have online classes. You've disrupted everything." I took a breath, keeping my voice calm. "Karen, our internet is not public property. It's my account. I pay for it." She crossed her arms, glaring at me like I'd just committed a crime. "That's not how this works. As HOA president, I established the community Wi-Fi policy. Everyone shares resources. It's part of living in a connected neighborhood." I tilted my head. "A policy you made up and never told me about." Her eyes darted for just a second, quick enough to tell me she knew I had her. But she pressed on, her voice rising. "If you don't restore access immediately, I'll issue you a violation notice and fine you. And trust me, those fines will add up fast." Behind me, Jake had stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, looking way too entertained for the situation. "You mean the access you stole without asking?" he said, his tone almost casual. Karen turned her glare on him. You did this, didn't you?" Jake just smiled. "All I did was secure our network. You know, so strangers can't use it for suspicious things." Karen's expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Annoyance, whatever it was. She covered it quickly with more anger. "I'm warning you, this is not over," she said, her voice sharp. You will regret this. And with that, she spun on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking hard against the driveway. For a long moment, I just stood there, watching her go. Well, I said finally, that went about as well as expected. Jake grinned. Oh, I think it went better than expected. Did you see her face when I mentioned suspicious activity? She knows something. I closed the door, shaking my head. Let's not jump to conclusions. But the truth was, I was thinking the same thing. That afternoon, things felt different. The air seemed heavier somehow. I caught myself glancing out the window more than usual, and each time, I saw little things that made my stomach twist. Karen's curtains, drawn tight in the middle of the day. Her car parked crookedly in her driveway, as if she'd pulled in too fast. And then, around dusk, a white panel van parked across the street, just far enough away to not be suspicious, but close enough that I noticed it. 2 men sat inside. They weren't looking at our house directly, but their heads moved in unison whenever a car passed. Jake noticed too. That's not a delivery van, he said quietly. No company logo, and they've been there for half an hour. We didn't know it yet, but that van would become a key piece of this whole mess. For the rest of the night I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were just repair workers or part of some survey crew, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. Jake kept tinkering with his laptop, glancing out the window every now and then. I could tell he was piecing something together in his head, even if he wasn't ready to share it yet. Later, as we sat down for dinner, Jake finally spoke. Dad, those weird IP addresses I saw earlier, they weren't just random people. Some of them were masked through multiple countries. That's not normal neighbor activity. That's like someone trying to hide something. I put my fork down and you think, he nodded toward Karen's house. I wanted to tell him he was overthinking it, but the truth was, I couldn't because deep down something told me he was right. And whatever Karen was hiding, we had just put ourselves right in the middle of it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was still early, maybe 6:30, and for a second I thought it was just some automated alert or a reminder. But when I looked, I saw a string of new emails, of them strange and in broken English, all from senders I didn't recognize. Subject lines like confirm your identity and urgent account access required filled my inbox. I frowned and sat up. Opening a couple of them, they were phishing attempts, ship scams with fake bank logos and odd links, but there were so many, all at once. It was as if someone had decided to flood my inbox overnight. When I went into the kitchen, Jake was already there, eating cereal with one hand and typing on his laptop with the other. Morning, I said, pouring myself some coffee. Got a minute to look at something weird? He spun the laptop around toward me. You mean like this? His inbox was the same, dozens of scam emails, all arriving within the past hour. Not a coincidence, I said slowly. Definitely not, Jake replied. It's called a spam attack. Sometimes people do it to distract you from seeing real security alerts in your email. Like if someone's trying to break into your accounts, you might not see the legit warnings. That sent a cold shiver down my spine. You think Karen's behind this? Jake shrugged. Could be, or someone she's connected to. But if I had to guess, yeah. We didn't have much time to dwell on it because around 9 o'clock, there was another knock at the door. This time it wasn't Karen, it was 2 men in gray uniforms with HOA badges clipped to their belts. I'd seen them before at meetings. They were part of Karen's so-called compliance team, which was really just a couple of guys she used to intimidate homeowners. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, stepped forward. We're here to issue you a formal notice, he said, holding out an envelope. I took it but didn't open it yet. What's this about? He gave a small smirk. Violation of HOA resource sharing policy. Failure to comply will result in daily fines until resolved. I laughed though. It was more out of disbelief than humor. There is no resource sharing policy. And even if there was, you can't make me share my private internet connection. The man's smirk faded slightly. You can bring that up at the hearing next week. Until then, the fines stand. I glanced past them toward the street. The white van from yesterday was still there, parked in the same spot. But now I noticed something new. A small camera mounted inside the windshield, pointed toward Karen's house. Whoever was in there wasn't just hanging around. They were watching her place. I signed the receipt for the notice mostly so they'd leave, and closed the door. Jake was standing in the hallway, listening. They're pushing hard, he said. Yeah, I replied, tearing open the envelope. Inside was a single page with Karen's signature at the bottom, stating that we owed $150 a day until we restored community access. I almost laughed again until I remembered the phishing emails in the van. The more Karen tried to play this like a petty HOA squabble, the more it felt like there was something much bigger underneath. By the afternoon, the retaliation stepped up a notch. Our mailbox, which had always been in good condition, was suddenly hanging by one screw. Someone had clearly yanked on it hard enough to almost rip it off the post. There were also muddy footprints on the edge of our driveway, leading right up to the side gate and then disappearing into the grass. Jake noticed something else. Hey Dad, the security camera on the garage soft line. I checked my phone and sure enough, the feed was frozen. When I went outside to look, the cable had been cut clean through. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just HOA politics anymore. Someone wanted us scared and maybe even blind to what they were doing that night. Jake stayed up late in his room, his face lit by the glow of his monitor. Around midnight he knocked on my door. "You awake?" I sat up. "Yatta, what is it?" He came in, holding his laptop. "I've been tracing some of the IP addresses from before I changed the password. I found one that kept connecting between 2 and 4 in the morning. Guess where it leads?" I rubbed my eyes. Where he turned the laptop toward me. The map showed our own neighborhood, but the pinpoint wasn't on Karen's house. It was on the small detached office shed she had in her backyard, the one she always called her HOA headquarters. I leaned back. "So whatever she's doing it from there." Jake nodded. "And I think it's bad, like federal bad." The next day the white van was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd just imagined their interest in Karen, but by evening, I saw them again, this time parked 2 streets over, almost hidden behind a row of tall hedges. I recognized one of the men inside from the day before, and it clicked that they weren't with the HOA at all. These guys were law enforcement, though not the local kind. That night, just before I went to bed, I got a knock on the door again. I opened it to find one of the men from the van standing there. He flashed a badge so quickly I barely caught the details, but it definitely wasn't a police badge. It looked more like a federal agency. "Can I help you?" I asked cautiously. He glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one was watching. "I'm going to keep this brief. We've been running an investigation for months. You and your son did the right thing changing that password, but I need you to keep doing what you're doing. Don't give it out, no matter who asks." I frowned. "Why? What's going on?" He gave a small, tight smile. "Let's just say your HOA president isn't exactly who she pretends to be. And the less you know right now, the better. Just be careful. She's already under a lot of pressure, and people like that can be unpredictable." Before I could ask anything else, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I closed the door slowly, my heart pounding. Jake was waiting in the hallway, having heard everything. "Dad, I told you," he whispered. "She's into something big." The next few days were tense. Karen didn't come to our door again, but we could feel her presence in little ways. The HOA newsletter she slid into every mailbox, passive-aggressively warning about selfish neighbors who refuse to participate in community programs, or the sudden uptick in cars slowly cruising past our house. Then one night, everything shifted. Jake was at his desk, headphones on, when he suddenly yanked them off and ran to the living room. "Dad, she's online right now." "Like right now?" I set up a monitor to track when her office shed connects to any network. "She's moving files, big ones." I followed him to his room, watching as lines of code scrolled across his screen. "If she's moving them," Jake said, "it means she knows someone's onto her. She might be trying to wipe stuff." I felt a knot in my stomach. "Should we call someone?" Jake hesitated. "If we do, she'll know it came from us." Before we could decide, flashing lights filled the street outside. Not 1 or 2 patrol cars, this was a full convoy. SUVs, unmarked vans and officers, in tactical gear, poured out, moving straight toward Karen's house. Jake and I stood at the window, silent, as they surrounded her property. They moved fast, breaching the side gate, some heading straight for the office shed while others went through the front door. Karen's shouts cut through the night, high-pitched and panicked, but they were drowned out by the commands of the officers. Within minutes, they were carrying out boxes of electronics, stacks of papers, even the small server rack she kept in the shed. Karen was handcuffed and led down her driveway, her face pale but her eyes still burning with anger. She spotted us at the window, and for a brief second, our eyes locked. "It wasn't just anger," I said, "it was something closer to hatred." Jake whispered. "She knows." And I knew he was right. Whatever she had been doing was over for now, but this wasn't the end. Not for her, and not for us. The night after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood was quiet in a way I hadn't heard in years. No dogs barking, no lawnmowers, no HOA patrol cars circling the block. It was a kind of silence that felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Even with her gone, there was a strange tension in the air, as if her presence still lingered somehow. Jake was still buzzing from the raid. He'd been glued to his laptop since the SWAT team left, scanning public records, news feeds, and any scrap of information he could dig up. I tried to focus on something else, anything else, but my mind kept replaying that brief moment when Karen had locked eyes with me as they led her away in cuffs. That look hadn't been confusion or disbelief. It had been a promise. By mid-morning, the first rumors started to spread. I was taking out the trash when my neighbor, Tom, walked over, clearly itching to talk. "Hey, you hear about Karen?" he asked, lowering his voice like it was still some sort of secret. I might have caught a little bit of it, I said dryly. Tom leaned in. "They say she was running some kind of identity theft ring, using people's info from HOA application accounts, social security numbers, the whole deal. And she had a bunch of I don't know, tech stuff, computers, servers, whatever. I kept my expression neutral. That's wild. Tom shrugged. Well, I guess you can't trust anybody these days. He headed back to his driveway, but I could feel his eyes on me. It made me realize something. People were going to start wondering how we fit into this. We had been the ones who cut off her internet access. And now, less than a week later, she was in federal custody. To most people, that wasn't a coincidence. When I got back inside, Jake was in the kitchen, pouring himself another bowl of cereal. You know, they'll probably want to talk to us, he said between bites. Who? I asked. The feds. I mean, think about it. If Karen was using our Wi-Fi, we're part of their case, even if we didn't know it, and I think they already know more about us than they've said. I sat down across from him. You think the guy who came to the door? Yeah, Jake said, nodding. He didn't just happen to be here. He probably had eyes on our place. For weeks, I wanted to argue, to tell him he was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew he was right. The van, the camera, the way they'd moved in so fast, it all pointed to a long-running investigation. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. The number was blocked, but when I answered, a calm professional voice came through. Mr. Parker, this is Agent Collins with the Federal Cybercrime Task Force. I'd like to arrange a time to speak with you and your son regarding the ongoing case involving Karen Dempsey. I felt my pulse quicken. You mean the HOA president? Yes, Collins said. We believe you may have information, direct or indirect, that could assist our investigation. Are you available today? An hour later, a black SUV pulled up in front of our house. Two agents stepped out. Collins, a tall man in his 40s with sharp eyes, and his partner, a woman named Ramirez, who looked like she could read every thought in your head just by watching your face. We sat at the dining table while Jake set his laptop in front of them. Collins gestured for him to go ahead. Jake took a breath and started explaining what he'd found before changing the password, the extra devices, the strange IP addresses, the large file transfers at odd hours. He pulled up logs he'd saved, showing timestamps and connection histories, and even a rough map of where some of the addresses had originated. Ramirez leaned forward. You realize what you stumbled onto, right? Those addresses aren't random, they're nodes in a dark web network. Karen was using your IP as a proxy, which means anyone tracing the traffic would think it came from here. Jake glanced at me. That's what I thought. Collins nodded. What you did locking down your network forced her to switch to a different setup. That was enough for us to pinpoint her actual location. We'd been trying to catch her for over a year. I felt a mix of pride and unease. So you've been watching her for that long? Longer, Collins said. But she's smart. She knew how to hide in plain sight. Running an HOA gave her access to all kinds of personal info, addresses, bank details. She'd store it, sell it, and sometimes use it herself. The internet access you provided, without knowing it, gave her a perfect shield. Ramirez looked at Jake. You might have just saved your dad from being dragged into a legal nightmare. If we'd raided her while she was still rooting through your IP, it would have been messy. The first suspicion would have fallen on this house. The weight of that hit me hard. I'd been angry at Jake for changing the password without telling me, but now it was clear he might have saved us both from a world of trouble. Before they left, Collins gave us a warning. Karen's in custody, but cases like this can get complicated. She has associates, and some of them may not be happy about her getting caught. Keep your doors locked, watch for anything out of the ordinary, and call us if you see anything suspicious. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time a car drove past, I caught myself peeking through the blinds. Jake noticed too, but he handled it with his usual mix of confidence and curiosity. That night, after we'd gone to bed, I woke up to the faint sound of gravel crunching outside. I slipped out of bed and went to the window. A dark sedan was parked at the far end of the street, headlights off. It wasn't the white van from before. This was different. On the morning, I found footprints in the dew-covered grass along the side of the house. They didn't lead to the door, just around the yard, like someone had been circling. Jake saw them too. Dad, I think this is just starting. He was right. 2 days later, a letter arrived in our mailbox. No return address. No stamp. Inside was a single piece of paper with one line typed in bold letters. You should have minded your own business. I didn't tell Jake about it right away. I tucked it into my desk drawer, but I could feel it burning a hole there all day. When I finally showed him, he read it twice and then looked up at me. She's not done, he said quietly. She's in federal custody. I reminded him. Yeah, Jake said, but that doesn't mean she's alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Collins had said about her having associates. If Karen had been running this operation for years, she probably had people who depended on her. People who might want to tie up loose ends. Around midnight, I heard Jake's voice from his room. Dad, come here. I walked in and saw his screen filled with live footage from our security cameras. He'd rewired the garage camera and set up motion alerts. One of the clips showed a figure walking up our driveway the night before, wearing a hood and gloves, stopping just short of the front porch before turning and walking away. Jake looked at me. That's not random, they were checking the place out. The next morning I called Collins. He listened without interrupting, then said, "We'll increase patrols in your area. In the meantime, stay alert. And if anything happens, don't confront them, call us immediately." It wasn't the most comforting advice, but at least it meant we weren't alone in this. Still, I knew we were in uncharted territory now. This wasn't just about Karen's arrest anymore, it was about whatever mess she'd left behind, and how much of it might still be heading our way. The next few days felt like living under a microscope. Every time I stepped outside, I caught myself scanning the street, half expecting to see that same dark sedan idling somewhere nearby. Jake barely left his room except to eat, his eyes glued to a rotating wall of surveillance feeds on his monitor. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was preparation. Something was coming, and we both knew it. On the third night after the letter, the trouble started. It was just past midnight when I woke to a faint buzzing sound. At first, I thought it was my phone vibrating, but when I checked the nightstand, it was silent. The noise was coming from outside. I pulled on a hoodie and went to the living room, peeking through the blinds. Down at the end of the driveway, our Wi-Fi router's backup battery, the one Jake had mounted inside a small, weatherproof box for testing, was lying on the ground, ripped open. Wires dangled out like torn veins. Whoever had been here hadn't just wanted to cut the connection, they wanted us to know they could. I was about to grab my phone when Jake came running in, holding his laptop. "They're trying to breach the network," he said breathlessly. "They've been hitting it with a brute force attack for the last 5 minutes. I thought it was just random traffic until I saw the signature. It's the same pattern from one of Karen's old devices." My stomach dropped. "You can trace it." "I'm trying," Jake said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "But they're bouncing it through a ton of proxies. I'll need time." We didn't get any more time. A dull thud shook the side of the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching in the gravel. Jake's eyes widened. "Back door," I whispered, motioning for him to stay low. We moved quietly to the kitchen, but by the time I got there, the back porch light was swinging gently. No one was in sight, but the latch on the gate was hanging open. I called Collins. He picked up on the second ring, his voice instantly alert. "Parker." "They're here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone's outside, trying to mess with our network and equipment." "Stay inside," he ordered. "We're dispatching units now. Don't engage." The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. Jake and I sat in the living room, every light off, waiting. A pair of headlights finally appeared down the street, and 2 unmarked SUVs rolled up. Agents spread out quickly, flashlights slicing through the night. But just like that, the intruders were gone, vanished into the dark. Collins came to the door, his face grim. "They knew exactly how long it would take for us to get here," he said. "This wasn't random, it was a warning." Jake crossed his arms. "Or a test. They wanted to see how fast you'd respond." Collins didn't argue. He just told us to stay alert and promised to have a patrol swing by every few hours. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew this wasn't over. The following morning, Jake was already deep in his laptop again. "I think I've got something," he said when I walked in. "They made a mistake last night. One of their proxy hops lagged for a few seconds, and I caught an originating IP before it switched. It's not a home address, it's a storage facility 2 towns over." I frowned. "Storage facility?" "Yep," Jake said. "But here's the weird part, it's got a fiber line running to it." I checked the utility records. That's not normal for storage units unless someone's running servers inside. It didn't take much convincing for Collins to take the lead. That afternoon, he and Ramirez rolled up in their SUV, and within an hour we were all parked down the street from the facility. Through binoculars, I could see the place was fenced off, but one of the units had a vent fan quietly humming. Every so often, the faint glow of LED lights would flicker behind the slats. Collins spoke quietly into his radio, and within minutes, a tactical team was moving in. The lock on the unit was cut, the door rolled up, and the entire space lit up with racks of servers, blinking like some kind of alien hive. Ramirez whistled softly. "Looks like we just found Karen's backup," but it wasn't just backup. Dated was worse. As the agents cataloged the equipment, they started pulling out box after box of physical files. HOA applications from neighborhoods all over the state, bank statements, even photocopies of driver's licenses. Jake stepped closer to one of the racks. "Dad, this thing still live. Someone's accessing it remotely." Collins swore under his breath and got on the radio again. But before they could fully secure the servers, the screens started going black, one by one. Whoever was on the other end had realized they'd been compromised and was wiping everything in real time. Jake didn't hesitate. He darted forward, plugged his laptop into one of the network cables and started typing furiously. "I'm pulling the active session logs," he said. "If I can grab even a partial trace before it shuts down, we might be able to find where the controller is." It worked bit. The final server went dark just as Jake's progress bar hit 100%. Back at the SUV, Collins studied the data Jake had pulled. "This is pointing to an address in the city, not a residence and office suite. That's where they are," I asked. "Or at least where one of them is," Collins said. "We've got enough now to get a warrant." By the time we got home, it was almost midnight. Jake was exhausted but wired. still processing everything we'd seen. I could tell he was proud of himself, though he'd gone from being the kid who locked down our Wi-Fi to being a critical part of a federal investigation. But the adrenaline faded quickly when we found another letter taped to our front door. This one wasn't typed, it was handwritten, in sharp, deliberate block letters. "You've made a very big mistake." I didn't even have to say it out loud. Jake knew exactly what it meant. Whoever was left in Karen's circle knew we were working with the feds now, and they weren't going to stop. We didn't sleep much that night. Around 3 in the morning, I heard Jake moving around in the kitchen. When I went in, I found him soldering something at the table. "It's a network honeypot," he explained without looking up. "If they try to connect again, I can feed them fake data and track where it's going without giving them access to anything real." I wanted to tell him to leave it to the professionals, but the truth was, he'd been one step ahead of all of us since this started. And as scary as it was, I was starting to realize something. Jake wasn't just defending our house anymore, he was baiting them. The next day, Collins called to say the city office address had gone dark overnight. Whoever was there had cleared out fast. "They know we're closing in," he said. "That makes them unpredictable." By that evening, Jake's honeypot caught its first bite. An unknown device connected, downloaded the fake files, and then tried to ping a remote server. Jake traced the signal in real time, muttering under his breath as his fingers flew, and then he froze. "Dad, it's coming from inside our neighborhood." The blood drained from my face. "You mean like right now?" Jake nodded. "Whoever it is, they're less than 100 yards away." We looked at each other, and without saying a word, I grabbed my phone and called Collins. 5 minutes later, unmarked SUVs rolled in, sweeping the street with their headlights. And that's when we saw a man in a gray hoodie, standing just inside the tree line behind the houses across from ours, staring at our window. When the agents approached, he bolted. They caught him 2 blocks over. He wasn't some random thug. He was a former HOA board member from a different community, one of Karen's early recruits, and according to Collins, he had instructions to take care of loose ends. As they loaded him into the SUV, I caught his eyes for a brief second. They were cold, calculating, and I knew right then Karen might be behind bars. But the people she'd worked with weren't going to let this go quietly. The arrest of the man in the gray hoodie shook the neighborhood like a sudden storm. By sunrise, everyone had heard something, though no one knew the full truth. Some whispered it was a prowler. Others said it was a disgruntled exemplar of the HOA, but Jake and I knew better. This wasn't over, not yet. Collins came by that morning with the kind of expression that told me he'd been up all night. He spread a stack of papers on our kitchen table, the edges smudged from his hands. "We've got enough now to connect Karen's network to multiple identity theft cases across 3 counties, he said. "Bank fraud, property scams, even cyber extortion." But he tapped the last page. "There's one last note in her network still active. We think it's the one pulling the strings while she's in custody." Jake leaned forward. "We're a private office in an old building downtown, rented under a shell company. Our guy in the hoodie had a burner phone with a text from someone there basically telling him to scare you 2 off." I exhaled slowly. "So, what'd you raid the place?" Collins shook his head. "We want them red-handed, actively committing a crime. That's where you 2 come in." The room went quiet. "You've been their primary target," Collins continued. "If we can lure them into making a direct connection to your network from that office, we can lock it down and use it as evidence in court. But it has to be your bait they take." Jake's eyes lit up with the same spark I'd seen when he first changed the Wi-Fi password all those weeks ago. "I can do it. I'll make the honeypot irresistible. Fake account numbers, access credentials, a few carefully placed breadcrumbs they can't resist." I hesitated, looking between them. "And what if they don't just stick to the network? What if they send someone here again?" "We'll have units posted nearby," Collins assured me. "You won't be alone." That night, the trap was set. Jake worked for hours, building a digital labyrinth designed to look like the motherlode of sensitive HOA and homeowner data. He even added a few fake confidential email drafts, supposedly from Karen herself, hinting at offshore accounts. By midnight, everything was in place. Jake's laptop displayed a quiet hum of network activity, the bait sitting out there like fresh meat on a hook. We waited. Nothing happened for 2 hours. Then, just past 2 a.m., Jake's screen flashed. "They're in," he whispered. "They're pulling the files." "No, they're duplicating the whole directory." Collins's voice came through the encrypted call in my ear. "We see it. We've traced the signal to the downtown office. Moving in now." The next 15 minutes were excruciating. Jake kept narrating in a low voice as the intruder worked, clicking through the fake data, following the trail deeper. At one point he paused and grinned. "They think they just found access to a dummy bank account. They're going to try logging in." That was the final nail. The moment they attempted to use the fake credentials, the feds moved. Collins's voice crackled back. "We're in. Suspect in custody. Whole setup seized." Jake leaned back in his chair, relief washing over his face. "That's it, right? We're done." I wanted to believe him. I really did. The next morning, Collins showed up one last time. The person in that office was Karen's second in command. He's flipping on the rest of the network to cut a deal. We've already recovered stolen funds and returned them to victims. He gave Jake a rare smile. You did good, kid. You didn't just help us, you crippled a criminal operation. When the official news broke, the neighborhood reacted the way you'd expect: shock, relief, and a little bit of embarrassment that it had all been happening right under their noses. The HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting to reassure residents, but the truth was, no one was ever going to look at them the same way again. Karen's trial was swift. With her network dismantled and her closest ally testifying against her, she was sentenced to over a decade in federal prison. When I saw her being led away in cuffs, she didn't look angry anymore, just beaten. Life slowly returned to normal. The strange car stopped showing up. No more notes taped to the door. No more shadowy figures in hoodies watching from the trees. Jake went back to school, but something in him had changed. He wasn't just the tech-savvy kid anymore, he was confident, sharper, like he'd glimpsed the real-world stakes of his skills. One night over dinner, he casually mentioned looking into cybersecurity as a career. I couldn't have been prouder. One quiet Sunday afternoon, we sat out on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. Jake was tinkering with a small drone, and I was just enjoying the peace. You know, he said, not looking up. I think Karen thought she was untouchable because she hid behind rules and systems. But the thing about systems is they all have weaknesses. You just have to know where to look. I smiled. Guess she didn't count on one of those weaknesses living right next door. He grinned. We never talked much about the night with the broken router, or the letter on the door, or the cold stare of the man in the hoodie. But I knew we both remembered, and I knew, if anything like this ever came our way again, we'd be ready. That night, after Jake had gone to bed, I stood for a while in the doorway of his room, watching him sleep. For weeks, I'd felt like we were just trying to keep our heads above water. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed we were actually safe. And if anyone else out there thought they could use intimidation, technology, or fear to push people around, well, they'd have to get through us first. Because the thing about poking at someone's Wi-Fi is sometimes you wake up the wrong person. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-life inspired drama, don't forget to check out Bright Reality on YouTube. For more videos, like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel.